So welcome everybody to Deliver Faster by Design. So we want to talk about how the tools you use are going to make or break your culture of shipping at work. And we'll talk about what all of that means. Today, we are going to be talking to, we've got myself, I'm Jason Lengstorf. I'm the VP of Developer Experience at Netlify. And I'll let you introduce yourselves. Sandra, do you want to give us an intro?
Yes, hi, I'm Sandra Schroeter. I'm Technical Product Marketing Manager at Magnolia. I have a technical background in system and database administration, but a couple of years ago, I turned to the dark side and I now work in marketing.
And Christopher?
Yeah, this is Topher Zimmerman, and I also just have a technical background. Basically, been developing for my career, moving from service companies, product companies, doing some startups, and then started here at Magnolia about 9 years ago. Amazing to have been there so long, never been so long somewhere. And as part of that journey, kind of transitioned from developer to product manager, focusing on developer experience.
Nice, nice. Yeah. And so we're going to be talking about just kind of development flows in general, but specifically we're going to be kind of talking about how Netlify and Magnolia can fit into that. So maybe the first thing that we should talk about is when we talk about a shipping culture, you know, there's this idea of like trouble in paradise, right? So companies, I don't think anybody at any company is sitting around thinking, you know, I wish I didn't have to do anything today, or like, I'm not going to ship anything today. Like we all want to get stuff done. We all want to be shipping quickly, but sometimes that slows down. And so we've got a poll. So I'm going to ask you some questions about that, but I'm going to kick off a poll at the same time about, you know, what do you see as the biggest cause of a slowdown? But I want to ask, maybe we can start with Sandra. When you're talking about a shipping culture, you know, what do you see as like problems that get in the way of that?
Yeah, specifically from a marketing perspective, I want to talk to that. And I think as we're here together as Magnolia and Netlify talking, I want to look at the CMS perspective of that construct. And what we found in a survey that we've recently completed with 500 developers and 500 marketeers, we found that 57%, so more than half of the marketeers, cannot create landing pages without the help of IT. And we also found that 36% of marketeers can't even edit any copy on existing pages. And when I looked at that, some people were surprised. And I thought, am I really surprised? And just looking back at my experience in marketing, I worked for companies where I had a more traditional CMS. I worked with a headless CMS, and I worked in a company where I didn't even have access to a CMS. So for me, that actually didn't come as a surprise. And what it shows is that the CMS, the ability for marketeers to work with it or not work with it, can be quite a blocker for getting experiences out to market. And I think that's a big problem today.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I think I would echo that as well. And I think the other problem that we run into is that as we're building out more and more aggressive apps, we start to see a lot of like complexity getting built in, where you've got different teams, but each of those teams owns a small piece of a broader system. And depending on how those things are set up and how everything is connected, you get this fragility that gets introduced, where if I touch my piece of the system, I'm not always sure that the thing that I just touched isn't going to break somebody else's stuff that I wasn't aware of. And so trying to get around that problem leads to a lot of processes, a lot of bureaucracy and overhead, a lot of manual checks. And all of those things can be very frustrating. They can be very slow. And it can lead to, you know, not just slowdowns, but also just a demotivation, like feeling like I don't have, you know, it's like, I don't want to deal with that process. I'm going to wait a little while. I'm going to batch up all of my work and do one big push instead of, you know, repeatedly shipping things. You try to batch it because you know how painful it is. Topher, I see you nodding vigorously over there.
Yeah. Just that you get scared, right? You get scared at a certain point, and and then you're not willing to take those risks. And that's when people aren't feeling confident, then they're not going to go ahead. They're going to do it as little as possible instead of as often as possible.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's
absolutely.
interesting, the results of the poll came in,
Mhm.
and the audience agrees. It's the number one biggest challenge is dependence on other teams.
And by a large margin,
Right, yeah.
double the amount of votes for dependence on other teams than any of the other answers, which is that aligns with my experience too. Is that you know the hardest part is feeling like you want to get things done and you know what you need to get done, but you can't because you have to wait for somebody else to sign off, or you have to wait for somebody else to flip the switch. And it's like, oh man, we could have been done with this a week ago if we could have just done it ourselves. And so I think maybe that's a good transition maybe into talking a little bit about why would we talk about that and then immediately kind of be framing it in headless CMSs and like what Netlify does. So let's start maybe by talking about headless CMSs, and in particular Magnolia. What does it do to help resolve that dependence on other teams, or that sense of frustration, and let you build that culture of shipping at work?
Yeah, I think what a CMS in general can do is it enables the content author to, well, I mean, just starting at the basics, it enables a non-technical person to get content provisioned and ideally push live to the website. So just starting at the basics. So you need something that that they feel they need, and that's only going to work when they feel comfortable with the CMS and confident that they know what the changes are going to look like once they get pushed live.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so I guess maybe we could talk about a couple examples of this. So like let's talk about the content author experience specifically. As a content author, what are some of the challenges? Maybe I'll throw this to Sandra. What are some of the challenges that a content author is going to run into when they are trying to manage their content?
Right. So from my perspective, what I would like to do is I would like to be able to edit content, create landing pages, and once I've done that, I also want to be able to see what it will look like. And I want to look at it maybe from like on desktop screen, and I want to look at it on a phone screen. And I want to be able to move things around and just do things and have the control without having to go to IT and explaining everything that I want them to do, giving them the brief, and then explaining what I want on the page. And I felt in this position a while ago. I'm just buying a new kitchen, and you might think, well, what does that have to do with it? But I went to the kitchen places and I sat in front of the kitchen planner, and they have their kitchen planning software. So I had to give them my room layout, and then I had to explain to them, where does everything go? Where does the fridge go? Where do I want drawers or kitchen units? And I felt like I want to get behind that desk and plan the kitchen myself. And it reminded me that with my previous CMSs, some of them, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it myself. And I plan a kitchen maybe once every 10 years. And it reminded me that I really don't want to go back to that position of having to explain what I want. So now in Magnolia, an example is we have a developer conference coming up in 2 weeks' time. And I created the landing page for that together with a colleague in marketing. And we were able to use the templates that our team had created for us and put them on the page, align them, add components where we wanted them. I was able to create all the copy myself. I was able to preview on different channels, and it was all really easy. And if I had to do that, telling someone, and every time we have a new speaker or a new speaker photo, going to an IT team or dev team and ask them to change it, it would have just have cost me so much time.
Yeah. And so you're able to take that all the way to production?
Yes, I can indeed.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great. So I also, I guess, like, do you see any challenges? Because I feel like one of the things that you're talking about here is, you know, you're gaining this freedom, and it's overcoming these challenges of having to relay what you want through an intermediary. And I think that, you know, from the developer's perspective, that's also something that I like. My least favorite thing when I used to work on a team that had that monolithic CMS setup is when, you know, we needed to get a marketing page up, and I would get a doc, like a Word doc. And then I had to like copy paste the Word doc from there into the code. And then we'd have to do, like, I'd sit down with the marketer and we'd look at it together, and they'd be like, oh, this didn't format properly, or, oh, I have a typo there, we need to fix that. And it was just very like, it didn't make me feel like I was developing. It made me feel like I was kind of like a, you know, like you said, you just wish you could have gotten behind and designed it yourself. But because you know, the tools aren't built for you, the tools are built for a developer, you're kind of stuck with this like translation layer, which isn't fun for anybody. Like it makes everybody feel like they're not doing their best work. But so I guess maybe I would ask, and Topher, I'll throw this one to you.
Sure.
What are the challenges for content authors when they are using a headless CMS?
Yeah, I think the challenges that can arise is, I mean, I don't know if you ever heard somebody say something like this, but I've heard this a few times, that you know, oh, well, for a headless project, you really need to, like, you know, change your way of thinking before you start the project. You know, you can't just you know, you can't just jump into it and treat it like a normal CMS. And I think that's coming a lot from like a typical approach in a headless CMS where, you know, there's sort of this concept of separating the content from the presentation and having like really kind of strict structured content types. And I think that's makes a lot of sense. That's kind of one of the visions of the headless CMS, that your content can then, it doesn't die when that one presentation dies. You can keep using it. You can use it in your next websites. You can use it on different channels. You could publish the same content to Twitter or Facebook. Chatbot could still use it because it's this nice structured content. So this is all well and good, but I think the problem comes when you've got authors, content authors, or marketers who maybe don't feel that comfortable. They, you know, with the sort of almost more like databasey approach, you know, that you would go in, you would enter some content in a certain place, and you don't necessarily even know where it's going to show up on the website. So you might feel a little bit unconfident, or if you don't get to see how it ends up. I mean, it's kind of a contradiction. You want it to be like future-proof and visible on anything, but at the same time, it's really important that it looks good on the website.
Right.
And then also just like this lack of creativity sometimes. Like for like a marketing author, they want to use their marketing skills to like really pitch a message or present a message or launch a campaign and communicate. And if they're working in this like, you know, again, like sort of formy, databasey world, they might not have the creativity that they would like. And that might be where, for example, you know, where they might need to go to the developer again. You know, oh, we want to do something a little bit special on the landing page. Can you help us with this thing? Which is fine if you've got somebody available and everything, but if they're not available and you need to wait, it can be a problem.
Sure. Yeah, well, and that actually is kind of an interesting thing too, because that's a challenge that developers face as well. Is you want to find this balance between, like, you don't want it to be too restrictive, because the you know, we talked about that kind of ultra restrictive case where the only thing a marketer can do is give you a Word doc, and then you have to go, like, you know, you have to, as a developer, move that content from a Word doc into the website. But then there's the flip side of that, where we've seen some tools where the website becomes a Word doc in and of itself, and anybody can go in and make the content look like anything. And you know, you get somebody who's a little overzealous on the weekend, and you come back and you find out that somebody switched it to Comic Sans, and you know, you've got this kind of like chaos because there's no rules, and anybody can change
with Comic Sans.
Nothing is wrong with comics. But so I guess what is interesting about the headless CMS space is that it creates this sense of freedom. But it also creates a risk that if there's too much freedom, too much configurability, then you're giving people enough slack to get themselves in trouble. And so I'm curious. I'm always curious how different tools are solving these problems and in creating the right guardrails to make sure that you have the freedom to do the things that you need to do, that you can use your marketing expertise and create a really great web experience, but that there's also the right guardrails that, you know, the web experience stays fast, that it follows our design system, that it uses the you know, we pay designers to come up with these really great like visualizations of how our content should look. So how do we make sure that we're using their expertise as well?
Yeah.
And so maybe you can talk a little bit about like how does Magnolia specifically, what does it have in place to kind of help create these guidelines and set up teams for success?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what's cool really with all CMSs is that it's a tool that developers use to make tools for the content authors, right? By how you configure the CMS and to more or less degree, depending on the CMS, you're making tools for your content authors, and it should match the team that you have. It should match the business, like what you're trying to accomplish, but it should also match the team. And we see that a lot. That's a part of like the design process for the site. There's always this this back and forth of, okay, for our team, we want to give them total freedom. So we give them like a totally open page template, basically. You know, it's got a header and a footer and go to town in the middle. And this is for like, you know, teams that are very comfortable, confident, they know what they want to create. It gives them that full freedom. But for other teams, it's like what you're saying. You don't want that, your precious design that you spent all that money on to get totally rampaged. And so there you can configure it differently. You can say, okay, no, here we have 6-page templates or 10-page templates. If you want a contact form, here's the contact form template. And you can even control, you know, where are those pages available? Under which other page are they available? Which ones are they not available? Or on a page itself, it's almost like a content model with these components. You can say, well, this component can only have these children.
Sure.
That makes sense. So you can put guardrails on it, and that spectrum of flexibility it should depend on the team and the project.
Nice. Okay.
And I think it also gives us some safety because we don't want to mess up the page. So we do want flexibility. But for example, I can't change the font. I have predefined fonts that I can use on the page. But like your Comic Sans example, I couldn't configure that font. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you know, I think that's really what we're looking for, right? As a team, is we're not looking to make teams completely independent. Nobody ever talks to each other. We're trying to find the right amount of communication. Like, we don't want it to be that marketing can't make any decisions without getting a developer to help, or that design, you know, is the only one who can make any decisions about where something goes on a page. But we want to make sure that we all get to use our respective expertise to create the best possible experiences with the least amount of friction. I think so. Maybe this is a good point to. I think you made a video of kind of what the Magnolia experience is, right?
Yeah, it would be great if we could share that people can sort of get a feel for what a headless editing experience can be like for marketers.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's share this video. So let me get this thing queued up, and let's take a couple minutes to watch this.
I'd like to show you the visual headless editing of Magnolia. So we've got this demo website. It's like a travel website. It's promoting different tours. And we've got a call to action. Here's some top trips and so forth. And then if I was to click on one of these tours, then I'm going to get to a detail page for that tour, and it's going to link to some related items. So what's the editing experience like for this project? Well, first I would like to show you sort of the standard typical headless editing for a content type. So Magnolia also provides this. And here we have all of our items, and it's structured content. So, I can make a change, but it's all just set fields already. Structured content. It's good for this type of thing where I just have specific fields that I want to fill out, but it's not giving me a preview. I don't really know where this is going to show up on the website, and I don't have so much creativity. But that's fine for this use case. And the other use case then is if a marketer or content author is, kind of editing that home page or landing pages. So here we have pages, and I can edit any of these, but let's just look at that home page that we already saw. So now I get a full preview, and if I want to change something, I can just go ahead and edit the item for you. We see the change there right away, so I can already check that it's working for me. I can also, any of these tours, I could link to those other content items that we saw before, so I can choose any of the tours in the project. And I can also, move things around pretty fluently. So now I have this Taste of Malaysia first. And then, of course, I can add components wherever I want. Let's just add one to the top. In here, add a rich text. So I can choose which component I want for any place on the website. Let's get creative, right? Because we got rich text. Okay, yeah, that was just a quick demo. You can see that I can see how the results are going to be. I can put things where I want. It's easy to move things around. And the developer story is also quite nice because it is a fully headless app, so I can choose whichever framework I want to use. And if we look at this component, this is the call to action. There's nothing Magnolia about it. It's just a vanilla React component, and it just gets the properties injected. And on the Magnolia side, we've also stuck to front-end development principles. Everything is in files, and it's very easy to change those editing dialogues. I could just copy and paste to create a new field, and then I could use that field in the React component.
Yeah, so you saw a few of those places where you could like drop a component. There you can limit. You can say, oh, well, actually, only these two components make sense here.
Yeah, yeah. So that's pretty cool. And I see actually like a lot of potential here in that you're letting the people who are designing the CMS, which would be a collaboration between marketing and development and design, they get to choose what level of flexibility is necessary, which I think is pretty exciting. And so I guess so we can see how a headless CMS plays in here. And then the other half of this is once you have a headless CMS, you started showing some code, we have to get that thing onto the internet, right? We have to be able to build a website that uses the data from the CMS, and that's the other half of this. When we talk about that shipping culture, that ability to quickly get things out the door and make it so that you can have an idea, get it to production without needing a bunch of different teams to participate or sign off. There's the content side of things where marketing needs to be able to make some changes and get things out without having to wait for a developer to become available, or without having to wait for a designer to come in and do an explicit sign off or a mock-up. And then there's the other side of this as well, which is the like for developers, once we've built those templates, we're still going to have iterative changes. We're going to need to make updates. So part of that is we don't want to have to require the marketers to come in and sit with us every time we want to make a change. But the other half of that is how do we get it live? How do we get that up onto the internet? And for a lot of front end teams, you can get stuck in not just being tied on the content side, but also on the deployment side, where you have your front end website, but then there's also this layer of it has to go through DevOps, it has to go through QA, it has to go through all of these layers of kind of back end deployment process before it can get to the internet. And that can take a long time. You know, I've seen companies where it takes weeks to go from we have a closed ticket to that thing is actually live in production. And so one of the things that you know, I think if we look at some of those slowdowns, we've got the same issues. We've got complexity. If the front end has too many dependencies on different pieces and the code is all intermixed, then it takes a really long time to test all of that. You don't know when one code change is going to break a bunch of other things. You end up with this too many moving parts, and you know, I want to change the way that this code on the front page works, but it turns out that that code was also linked to this like internal data layer, and now our API is broken. And you know, I've worked on teams where this stuff happens, and you end up with these we call them write-only files, where the code is so complicated that you never change any of it because you're guaranteed to break something. So you just add something at the bottom of the file that's specific to your needs, and it's a nightmare. It's terrifying. You know, you're very very worried about everything going wrong in that case. But yeah, so you know, and all of that, you know, with write-only files and lots of moving parts leads to this problem where nobody understands the whole system. And that, I think, is at the root of the problem, is that if you can't keep the entirety of what you're trying to do in your head, then you can't be confident about what you're moving out to the internet. And any system is complex. You know, you're always going to end up with complexity. But I think what we can do by, you know, if we have Magnolia set up where somebody is able to go in and just think about the content on the page, they don't have that additional context to hold in their head of what does the code do? How does it deploy? Whatever. You can just go look at it and say, here's some content. And then you take that content and you push the go button and it goes live. And we want that same thing for the tech and for, you know, for the developers. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm pretty excited about the Jamstack for that. And so there was a question actually that came in that I would like to relay over here, which is it possible to build an application in Next.js using the live editor preview tool from Magnolia?
It is possible. Yeah.
Nice.
We do have I know the team has built an internal demo. I'm not sure if that's been made public yet, but we'll be doing that shortly. So you basically, you know, you can have two different instances. You can do it two different ways. You could have one instance, or you could have two different instances of your Next server. One specifically for the authoring, where you have everything doing SSR, and then you have another one that's doing your SSG as well. Which of course you wouldn't want that in your authoring experience because you'd have to like render everything every time. But you can just have a preview mode and then the actual delivery mode.
Yeah, absolutely. And that question came from Johannes Lindgren, who has their hand up. So Johannes, I'm going to unmute you, but if your hand was up for, hand went down. So I think that was the question that we were asking. So yeah, if you do have a question and you want to ask it, you absolutely feel free to drop it in the Q&A panel, or you can raise your hand and we can make sure that is answered. So cool. So with that, I think, you know, talking about the Jamstack specifically, obviously that's sort of where I live, and this is going to lead to me rambling a little bit. But I'm curious, you know, when you were just mentioning this idea of like, you know, you've got the SSR, the server side rendering for preview mode, and the SSG, static site generation, and you're using that for production mode, right? Yeah. So when one of the things that I get really excited about when we talk about this Jamstack architecture and why I think it's such a big win for development teams is the same way that when you're trying to write content, you don't want to have to wait on a developer to copy paste that content over into the code. When you're a front end developer, you don't want to like build a front end and then find yourself doing a bunch of back end code or node configuration or DevOps to try to get your front end code onto the internet. You want to be able to just write front end code and then have that go live. And the thing that I think is really exciting about that is when you use the Jamstack, what you're doing is you're creating this strong decoupling of your front end and your back end. And you mentioned the static site generation part of building with Magnolia. You have the way that the site builds is that you build your front end and then it becomes a folder full of files instead of needing a server, instead of needing all of this complex scaling, all of these, load balancers and databases and making sure that your server can handle, a bunch of simultaneous, because, as a marketing team, you're always hoping that you go viral, right?
Yeah,
And
as a developer, you're hoping it doesn't go viral.
yeah, well, yeah, as a developer, if you've got a deployment process that is not built for massive scale, then going viral, that's a bad weekend for you. Suddenly you're getting paged at dinner on Friday night because your sale was too successful. and
I would say
that's
that's a good problem to have.
it's a great problem to have for the marketing team and a bad problem to have for the development team. And so we want to make sure that we align those incentives. And one of the things that I like about the Jamstack architecture is that when you deploy with it, you're deploying that generated, that compiled UI. You do the build work ahead of time. And that's the heavy lifting. That's the stuff that causes websites to go down under load. You do that ahead of time, and then you deploy that to a CDN. And under load, a CDN is the best possible thing to have to handle your traffic. Of all the things that are going to get DDoSed or taken down by a huge spike in traffic, the CDN is at close to the bottom of that list in terms of things that are going to get overwhelmed. And so what I'm really excited about with it as an approach is that because you are compiling that UI, you don't need that node server to take it live. You don't have to configure a load balancer. You're not managing caches because the CDN is managing that for you. You get these snapshots in time with your Jamstack site that if you deploy it, it's going to work. If it built and you can look at it, it works. And so when you're looking at Netlify, we build everything in a deploy preview. So you can see, let's pull from Magnolia, let's get that content, let's build an instance of the site. We use our decoupled UI, we compile everything, and we can look at it at a URL. We all take a look, we all agree that it's right, and we push the go button, and it will immediately build and go live. And we realize that we missed something, that's okay. We can click one button and roll it back and go back to the previous deployed thing. And so the risk just goes way down. The dependency on other teams goes way down, and we get to see this stuff go live very, very quickly. But I do have a great question in the chat that maybe I'll throw at you, Topher. If you want to have a live editor preview for an app that is Jamstack, you kind of touched on this, but how would you actually configure that if you wanted to be able to run like the live preview version of this, but you were using a Jamstack architecture? How would you set that up in your estimation?
Yeah, we have like a Gatsby demo project that's available, and there what we did is we had basically it's kind of a rugged approach, but it does the job. We just got like two sets of URLs, and one of them is going to be rendering the always the server-side rendering.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to always get the latest content that has been edited, and then you have another set of URLs that are mapped to the static content. So you still need to, obviously you've got the preview. Where the app is still hitting the CMS to get the JSON that has the content you just changed. Yeah, at the same time you can render it out. Or you can take this approach of having two different versions of your app. You can have one that's being used for your static deployment, and another one that's being used for the live preview in Magnolia. And I mean, the way that the Magnolia editor is letting you add in these UI elements for the author, it's a very primitive approach, and it's based on static pages. Actually, in the end, it can load in any page, and the page just needs to have these annotations in it, which are basically just like HTML comments. And
Mm.
basically what I'm trying to say is you can use it on anything because it's such a simple approach.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And to maybe just add like a little bit of Jamstack color to that, you know, when you're running a preview server, that preview server doesn't need to be accessible to very many people. So you don't have to massively scale this. It doesn't need to be this this kind of beast of an architecture. You can just run like a little node server that runs the Gatsby develop process. And when you need to send a preview, you just send people a link to that running Gatsby dev process or to a running like next dev process on a server. It doesn't have to be fast because the intention isn't to be production ready. It's to preview your content. And so a lot of teams I've seen, they're literally just running a tiny little box on DigitalOcean or on a, you know, an AWS box that's the cheapest thing they can find that'll run the node development process or, you know, a server instance of the project, so that when they load that page, it loads the latest stuff, like you said, on demand. It's just going to hit the CMS and say, what do you have now? And does Magnolia have like a preview flag, like you can mark content as draft or production, or is it kind of like yes or no?
Well, you can work on it before you publish it, so it's basically always by default in a preview content, and then when you want to publish it, you take the publish action, and it goes to the publishing workflow. You can have 4i, 6i, whatever workflows, and then that's actually, we have this Netlify extension now, and that's what it does. It basically plugs into that publication workflow, so that when the author publishes, you trigger the basically behind the scenes the webhook to Netlify, which then will rebuild the content once you've decided it goes live. So again, we're like empowering the author to not to be dependent on a developer to, hey, can you do a new publish of the site? It's just all I have to do is hit the publish button, and the book is generated.
Yeah, that's really handy. Like, I think the thing that I find really exciting is that when you get this workflow set up, a team that is set up on the Jamstack architecture with a good content management flow. So if you're running Magnolia and you've got Netlify and you've hooked up this extension that will automatically rebuild the site when you publish content, instead of going to production once every 3 weeks, you're going to production every time somebody clicks the button. Multiple deploys to production per day with safety, with a level of confidence that that if something goes wrong, you can just immediately fix it. You can push a new version, or you can roll back to the previous version and undo that work.
That was very exciting. That was a key part of why we mentioned in the teaser or the abstract that there's this common customer of ours that is using Netlify and Magnolia, and they're like a huge retailer, over 500 stores. They've been like consolidating their whole stack and optimizing everything, but they had to keep a few different e-commerce systems because they didn't have any that would match all their requirements as they're doing this big consolidation, because they had acquired 10 different companies with all their different tech systems. But what they did keep, they were able to narrow down to one deployment system and one CMS that met all their needs. And Magnolia and Netlify, and that was one of the key things that was so important for them. They were just totally sold on the Jamstack, and they're like, we're definitely doing the Jamstack. And what they told us was that it was like basically those atomic commits, knowing that everything would go instantly, and the rollback and the A/B testing. It was that level of they just felt safe. They knew it was going to work, and they were going to be able to handle any issues.
Yeah.
And I think maybe I don't know. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to talk about risk management. I think that the scariest thing for a lot of companies is you want your teams to be autonomous, and you want people to be able to do their jobs and do it confidently and quickly. But the flip side of that is, that joke we made earlier, if somebody gets a little overzealous over the weekend and they just kind of go in and they have ultimate free reign to just make a mess of everything, that's a risk, and you don't necessarily want that. So you're always, as a company, trying to find the right balance of checks and balances and risk management without getting in the way of your teams, without slowing them down or making them feel overburdened. And what you're talking about is so much of what we're trying to. I think about this all the time, right? Where does that right boundary, and how do you give teams autonomy without exposing yourself to extra risk? And that's what got me excited about this architecture. That's what got me excited about, Netlify as a product, about headless CMSs. It's one of the things that seems really exciting about Magnolia, is this idea that, like, you're giving people all the tools to work very quickly without overexposing yourself to risk, without overexposing yourself to chaos.
Cool.
Yeah. We've got another question in the chat from Ethan. Is Magnolia content version controlled?
It is, yes.
So do you get that same kind of like rollback idea where if I publish something on Magnolia and then you come in and make a change and we decide after it goes live that we don't like it, we can just roll back?
Yeah, it's going to take a little bit longer than a Jamstack rollback, but well, except if you're combined with Jamstack, then of course you get the instant Jamstack rollback. But if you don't necessarily, you've got as many versions as you want on each piece of content. So as an author, you can actually even have a visual diff, so you can see a visual differentiation of what's been changed between any two versions, and you can roll back to any version, and then you would publish that. You publish that rollback basically.
Nice. Yeah, that's huge. So Sandra, we went into nerd mode for a little while there, but have you, like, are you, having listened to all that and kind of talking about the risk management and the idea of making teams go fast, where are you kind of seeing the same thing in teams that you're talking to and the customers that you're working with, that do you feel like that's an accurate description of the goals they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think it is. And what you spoke about earlier, giving marketing full reign or restricting what marketing can do. I called that safety, and you said de-risk the situation, because if you decouple the content from the actual front-end code, there's nothing that marketing could break in that code, because all we do is work on the content. But because of that rendering that we do of the SPA, the front-end code, we can still see what it is that we've created and where content is going to be displayed. And just to come back to that customer that Topher mentioned, I spoke with the sales team earlier, and they said that something that this customer was specifically interested in, yes, was headless and was Netlify, but they said typically headless doesn't really do well with what you see is what you get. And that's something that they were really happy with. And we're talking about how those teams can work together. And maybe it sounds a bit cheesy, but with this customer, their developers are happy because they can work with the Jamstack, they can work with the front end of their choice. And the marketeers, they still get that visual editor, they still get that preview. So I think what we've discussed is what we also see with our customers, both in marketing and development.
I really like that. I think that that's a really good point, that, if you look at the way that teams get structured, a lot of times teams, there's this joke that the companies ship their org chart. And I think when you look at the tools that companies choose, a lot of times you'll see that if leadership is very content driven, they're going to choose a tool that's very friendly for content editors. If the leadership team is all developers, they're going to choose tools that are very friendly for developers. And before the Jamstack and headless CMSs, what that usually meant was a trade-off. If the company was run by developers, then the content team was going to be like in GitHub trying to write pull requests to make content changes, or with that Microsoft Word doc going to the developer saying, like, please put this on the website. And vice versa, if the content team was, if the leadership team was all on content, then the developers are being asked to use whatever monolithic CMS the content team likes, whether or not it's pleasant to work with. And so you get stuck with with tools that are really cumbersome, or languages that are really archaic, or templating systems that are really painful. And so I really like that where we've landed with headless CMSs and with the Jamstack is that everybody gets what they want, which is that autonomy and control. And you don't see those trade-offs where if I get something that's developer friendly, it costs you in marketing the ability to be agile with your code or with your content.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. And I see the visual editing, you know, that page editing. Okay, you don't need it for every project. For some projects, it doesn't make sense. But if you have a project where you do have a marketing team that needs that creativity, or maybe you've got a team that aren't using the CMS that often, they're not as technically like adept, then I feel like this like visual editing, it can be the way to get like a green light on going headless and going Jamstack. If you're trying to convince your marketing team, they're like, oh, but what about, are we gonna have this? And you're like, no, we're gonna go headless. It's gonna be awesome for us, and it's gonna be awesome for you. So let's do it, you know?
Yeah.
And it sounds like so simple, because I think I've said that a couple of times. I just want to see what I do. But it is really important in what we do.
Absolutely. All right, so to everyone watching along with us, if you have questions, now is a good time to drop those into that Q&A widget. And while we are waiting to see if any questions come in, I've got one more question, which is, how does everything that we've talked about today roll up to a better experience for the people who use the websites that we're building?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, as far we kind of answered that with, I think for the Jamstack, just that the site is going to be super duper fast, and everybody likes fast sites. You know, you're happy if it's site, and if it's fast, and if it didn't come down. And then, but I think on the kind of the marketing side, again, that you know, having a preview, the marketers are able to create an experience that's going to work. And of course, their goal is to make a great experience for the customers visiting the site.
Yeah.
And it's easier to keep it up to date.
I think
Right.
that's probably the one that I would lean on the most, is that, you know, this being able to ship today, to ship multiple times today, as opposed to, you know, well, this will probably go live in a week or two. It's so nice to be able to respond when you get feedback, to be able to make those changes quickly and really listen.
Maybe in some industries that isn't super important, but if you just look at the media, which is probably the example where that's most important, just getting news out the door as soon as you can, and content authors being able to do that themselves. And then of course we've got companies anywhere in the middle, but what we see is that time to market and having an up-to-date website is really more and more important than it has been in the past. So like you say, shipping a couple times a day really can make the difference whether a website is relevant or is not relevant.
Yeah. I mean, being able to ship as content becomes available is huge. And I think about that in, you know, in media, but also in e-commerce. You know, if there's nothing more frustrating than trying to go to a website and you get all the way through the checkout and then you find out that thing's actually out of stock. Or you go and you see a page about a sale, and then you go try to use it and you find out that the sale is ended. You were looking at an old page. That type of experience is so frustrating as a user. And so being able to respond quickly and you know, not make it cumbersome for the team to very quickly update the entire site to reflect the current state of things is so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking it back to, I know you asked about the end user experience, but we spoke about retail, we spoke about media. When I think of insurance and banking, financial services and compliance topics, that sounds a bit boring, but that also has to be out at a certain time. So it's really important that I can publish when I have to publish.
Yeah, that's
Or
true.
I can schedule
Yeah, as a developer, I have definitely had many a night in previous roles where we all had to set alarms to wake up at, you know, 4 o'clock in the morning because that was when the thing needed to go live. It is really nice to not have to do that anymore, because we know that we can set things to go live. We can set that build to go to happen when it needs to happen, and we know it's just going to work. That stuff
Yep.
is really quality of life.
Yeah.
Well, great. So I'm not seeing any questions come in. I think I feel like I don't have any additional questions. Did you have anything that you wanted to cover before we start wrapping this thing up?
I think we've done really well, so no.
No, it's good.
Yeah, I mean, proud of a job well done, right? I think I think we've done. I'm excited. I love what y'all are doing over there. I think that it poses some really big productivity wins, some really good opportunities for teams that are trying to give everyone in the company the autonomy and the ability to just move quickly and do the work that needs to be done, not feel like they're beholden to anybody else or like they have to wait for permission to do their job. I am super excited to see what y'all who are watching today are able to do. And I'd be curious to see if you want to share with us on Twitter. You can, what's the Magnolia CMS Twitter?
What is
It is Magnolia CMS, I believe, but I should know that. I'm marketing, but hey.
And you can send us a message at Netlify. Let us know what you're building. Let us know what you're excited about. And if you have additional questions, you can tag us there. You can find Sandra, Topher, or me online and ask us questions. We would love to talk to you. But with that, I think we can call this one. We can call this one a wrap. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jason. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us today, and we will see you next time.
Yep. Bye, everybody.
Bye.